This killer is able to hunt down and wipe out these people in the most brutal ways possible, and no one knows where he went. It just stops. The tabloid newspapers that are emerging at this period are fixated on this criminal, and the police are completely stumped what to do about it.
If Jack the Ripper had such a bloodlust, and he clearly enjoyed the game of killing them, taunting the police, why would he stop? And why would he stop without announcing that he had stopped?
I think it gets forgotten as you go through cases, and people, at its core, vulnerable, frightened people suffer the most atrocious and egregious crimes that you could commit on an individual. I've found someone who I think is quite a good suspect. The horrible thing is that the police never looked at him as a suspect. They looked at him as a witness. With this individual I'm going to mention, we have him banged to rights at a murder scene by name, and he is the man I think was Jack the Ripper. But who's to say that the Ripper was never seen at any of the crimes? He was never treated as a witness, never treated as a suspect. He could be completely unknown to us, and that is what makes Jack the Ripper so fascinating. He could be anyone, but he is no one.
Hello and welcome back to the men's room. Thank you very much for joining us. We are back for our second episode of Unsolved Mysteries. As always, I'm joined by the brilliant Adam Brown.
I'm glad to be here, mate. This is going to be a big one.
Before we get started, make sure to follow us at Real Men's Room on Instagram and Twitter. And if you're listening on YouTube, make sure to hit subscribe to stay up to date with all of our new episodes. Adam, this is an episode that you're the one that sort of engineered this one. For once, I'm going to throw the reins over for the men's room. I'm going to let you sort of guide the...
Reins.
Exactly. I'm going to let you...
They're in my hands.
The direction of this. So what are we talking about today?
So this week we are talking about probably the most infamous serial killer of all time. We are talking about Jack the Ripper. With the Unsolved series that we're doing now, so we spoke about Madeleine McCann, and that was kind of our gateway into these episodes. I think
I must say, it banged. I'm really happy that episode has banged. I mean,
it was a hell of an episode. I think there was just this perfect combo of, good research, and obviously with all the sort of new news that's coming out. It's a fascinating case, and it's drawn that attention for well over a decade now, nearly two. But now with this story, with this case, this is one that's, it's generated this sort of morbid curiosity for over a century. It's a really sort of crazy story. And I think there are so many of these unsolved mysteries, and they always sort of draw people in, because there's something about that unknown that I think makes us uncomfortable, but also makes us curious.
Yeah.
And it's something that people can get involved with. And I really wanted to talk about this case because it is just so fascinating. Because I often sort of, with Jack the Ripper, it's that sort of mystery of why do people keep talking about this guy?
Yeah.
It's this sort of dusty old set of murders that happened, nearly 200 years ago now.
That's like it was. I've always been familiar with Jack the Ripper, of course. Growing up in Britain, it is one of those sort of.
It's a bit of a cultural mainstay.
It's
like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, like folklore, that kind of thing. I hadn't really comprehended how recent 1888 is.
No, totally. I think
you see the the drawings of Jack the Ripper going down the concrete streets and the brickwork and all of that in long black coats. And the cobbles, exactly. But 1888, that was only 40 years later was the war.
Yeah, it's actually quite recent. I think it's my great granddad was born in London in like 1880. So like he would have been a kid when the Ripper murders were happening. So he probably would have had a memory of all the hype, so to speak, the media frenzy that surrounded that.
Absolutely.
But I sort of I often wonder why people still talk about this murder, because there's all these different murders and killings and things that happen between now and then. And there have been serial killers who have been more voracious and violent since then, who have never reached the level of infamy.
Exactly.
And I was sort of wondering why that was. And I think it's because Jack the Ripper kind of sets the precedent for what serial killers want to be.
So in a sentence, for for whatever reason, aren't familiar with what we're talking about, in a sentence, in a couple of lines, delineate for us who Jack the Ripper was and what happened, when, all of that kind of thing.
Right. So, in 1888, in something that would become known as the Autumn of Terror, this presumably single killer goes about and creates havoc, kills 5 women, possibly up to 11 over this space of time, and just creates this atmosphere of horror. His violence escalates. The way he's killing gains notoriety. The tabloid newspapers that are emerging at this period are fixated on this criminal, and the police are completely stumped what to do about it. The police haven't got a single clue what to do with this guy. The number of the real information they have is so minimal and so scattered, it's almost useless. And he gets away with it. This killer is able to hunt down and wipe out these people in the most brutal ways possible, and no one knows where he went. It just stops. And I think that's what really builds this notoriety towards him, because it's this world that the Ripper creates, the case, it's so rich, you can sort of dive into it. Because he, assuming it was a he manages to just create this whole... He sort of sets the benchmark for every serial killer going forward. Like, he gets away with the killings. 2, he escalates his violence. 3, he creates this... He creates societal change. That's the biggest thing, is that his killings led to actual change in the way that London was built. Because of the way society was at the time, people would... The lowest of the low were neglected. And because people weren't being helped, it enabled someone so predatory as Jack the Ripper to go in there, make these killings. And because of it, top brass police and the Home Secretary resigned. And all the slums that were in Whitechapel, which was the district of London where these killings happened, are wiped away. His killings ultimately bring attention to the most impoverished people in the city. And it not to say that Jack the Ripper, because he wasn't a force for good, but he was a force for change. What he does ultimately affects the landscape of London going forward forever. He changes things. But it's sort of incredible the amount of impact that he had. He garnered all this scrutiny from the British Empire that just resulted into massive change. But he does all of this stuff and he gets away with it.
Yeah, that is the thing.
He never confesses and he remains anonymous to this day. But it's so difficult, I think, to get to the actual nitty-gritty of it. I mean, you've done the research as much as I have. It's kind of impossible to find sort of accuracy with it. There's so much extraneous fluff. There's things journalists at the time said, which was probably made up. There's letters sent to the police that some of them seem accurate, some of them don't, but they don't seem to be all from the same person. You've got all these... The way that the violence escalates, certain killings don't seem to match up. But I think what we can ultimately pin down is that I think, from the research I've done, Jack the Ripper killed 5 women. And I think as well, he was interviewed by the police, but was never looked at as a suspect. I've found someone who I think is quite a good suspect, done a lot of research, and there's someone who jumps out at me because this individual can be pinpointed at the scene of a crime. We know he was there. And I think that's a fascinating detail, but he was never looked at as a suspect. We'll get into who he was later.
I want to get into this. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I think we should go for it. Let's do this.
Okay, so do you want to go through a timeline? Go through the events of...
If we go through who the Canonical 5, as they become known, the Canonical 5 victims are, how they were killed, and give a timeline, and then we'll for want of a better word, we'll dissect them.
Maybe not dissect. We should probably do a disclaimer now, because this is violent. What Jack the Ripper did was absolutely abhorrent. These crimes are horrific, and if you are a bit squeamish or you're not comfortable hearing about that level of grotesque violence, because we will end up describing some details because they're kind of important. then you've been warned. You know, this is going to get a little bit dark.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think also, just a quick one, the Canonical Five, between 1888, which is when the first killings happened, and 1891, there were 11 killings that were sort of erroneously linked into one case. They were unsolved killings towards prostitutes, essentially. But between these 11, 5 of them happened in a fairly short space of time. And these are what are called the Canonical Five. So we'll break down a sort of timeline. So these all happen between sort of mid to late August all the way to November. And I do think that 5 people were killed by the Ripper.
Yeah.
But one of the victims of the Canonical Five, I don't think was killed by Jack the Ripper. But I do think there was a 5th person killed by Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, this Canonical Five is the widely accepted 5 victims of Jack the Ripper, isn't it?
Yeah, they are the ones that will come up with almost no question. Yeah. They're sort of looked at as unquestionably being done by Jack the Ripper. The other killings are a little bit different. The MO, the way that the murderer killed these people doesn't match up, but these 5 seem fairly consistent.
Yeah.
And there is, through all of them, an escalation of the violence.
For sure.
With the exception of one, who I think's erroneously linked, but we'll get into that.
Let's do it. Okay, so first victim. So on the 31st of August, 1888, Mary Ann Nichols is found with her throat slashed and disemboweled. Now, she was a prostitute, am I right?
Yep. She sets the precedent for all of these killings going forward. Yeah. So she's destitute, she's pretty much homeless, she's running from DOS house to DOS house, trying to get money each night to have a roof over her head, essentially. She's around 45, around middle-aged. Most of the Ripper's victims are in their 40s, give or take. That kind of sets how the Ripper's going to kill. And the way that he seems to select his victims, it's set here. And also with the violence here, the way he kills her. So he slashes her throat and he disembowels her. And he's initially found by a cart driver and is found dead in front of an entrance to a stable.
Yeah.
And and also it's worth noting that all of these killings happen in the early morning. It's around 3 o'clock-ish in the morning. So we've got a few things here. We know the kind of person that Jack's going to kill. Middle-aged prostitutes, weak. A lot of them are alcoholics as well. So he's going for quite vulnerable people.
Yeah. Late.
We also see
around. Yeah.
And he seems to kill at a specific time. He kills early morning. All of these murders happen between about 3 and 5 o'clock in the morning, sometimes a little bit earlier than that. Yeah. But that's around the sort of time you're looking. But that definitely sets how these things are going to go forward. And this is the 31st, as you say.
And also, I think something to mention is that at the time, I don't know if there would have been a thought process in his head of the fact that he was killing prostitutes. They didn't matter as much to the society.
I think they were just the easiest targets to go for.
Yeah,
ultimately, fortunately, because they couldn't defend themselves. Like if you were to go after a drunk man, you could have a fight, you could get into a scuffle, that would draw attention. These are people you can kill fairly quietly. With a prostitute, there is that intimate angle where you can go, right, let's go to this dark corner. And it isn't looked as, I'm in danger. It's, well, this is where I do my business.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. The next victim we have is Annie Chapman on the 8th of September, 1888. Now, this is where, as you say about the escalation in violence, this is where it sort of starts. She has her throat slashed again, but this time her womb is missing. And the chief medical officer at the time said that the killer must have had anatomical knowledge because of the way that the womb was removed. And my question to you, as someone that you obviously know a lot more about this case than I do. So, initially that points towards a doctor and someone that had a basic anatomical knowledge. But how readily available was, because obviously you can't go online, go on YouTube, type in how to remove a womb or anything. So how easily accessible was that kind of knowledge? It had to have been a doctor, surely.
I don't think it was a doctor. The person who I think it wasn't a doctor. But the idea of getting anatomical knowledge, you have to bear in mind that, as you said, this wasn't a time where the internet was around. So it also means that the careers that people had were different. A lot of them they were laymen, they were very practical. It was all hand-to-hand work. And a lot of people here would have been fishmongers, meat packers. They would have been cutting up meat, cutting through things, so they would have had access to sharp knives. And ultimately, this is going to sound sort of slightly strange, but pig anatomy, for instance, isn't drastically different from human anatomy.
Yeah.
If you can cut open a pig and pinch out things, exactly. If you look at early anatomists, a lot of them took influence from the way that they would be able to cut open animals, but for religious reasons, they weren't able to open up humans in early dissection. So you could ascertain a certain amount of anatomical knowledge from cutting up an animal if you couldn't do that. But also, as much as this was a long time ago, literacy in people was probably at its highest that it had been at this time. More people were able to read, and not necessarily write, but more people were able to read. Books would have been published, and there would have been, as you say, these books about anatomy that would have been about at the time. So in theory, someone could read into it and they could try their hand at a bit of DIY knowledge. The idea that it is a surgeon, whilst it does make sense, I don't think is necessarily hard and fast. Okay. I think that anyone who's skilled enough with a blade and has maybe dissected animals, cut through meat, they can probably fill in the blanks, and they sort of maybe know what they're looking for enough.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily think it's a surgeon.
Okay, because that was one question that I had during this, of course. But yeah, you mentioned there, I mean, a butcher is just as likely as a doctor in that case. If
anyone who works with sharp knives could be an eligible ripper suspect.
For sure. Then next on the timeline, I've got on the 27th of September, my birthday, if anyone wants to put it in their calendar, 1888, of course, there was a letter received by the Central News Agency. And this is the iconic historical Dear Boss letter. So it was written in red ink, 2 pages long. And an interesting point, it contained a lot of spelling and punctuation errors in it. And the overall motivation of the author was to sort of mock the investigative effort and allude to future murders. And I've got the letter here for you, so I'm going to read through it for us. So, Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about leather apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. And that's going to get clipped up and put into no context men's room.
Yeah.
Grand work, the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough though, I hope. Ha ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ear off and send it to police officers, just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife is so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get the chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. Interesting.
The letters are one of the intriguing bits, I think, of the Ripper legend, if you want. I think they kind of create... I think they're one of the reasons that really draws people into it. The idea that the Ripper's actually taking time between murders to jot down a little note and send it to significant people, because he sends some to the... Yeah. Some are sent to papers. One is sent to a man called, I think it was George Lusk, who was in charge of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee.
came a bit
I
later.
think one was actually sent to the police as well. I think one of them was actually sent to the police. And a lot of them contain certain details that maybe suggest that it was actually the Ripper, but they're strenuous at best.
I think we'll analyse them once we have all the information. I think.
But that's then it starts. But that there sets the precedent of the Ripper's taunting.
Exactly. Yeah.
He's creating wider fear in beyond just killing people. He is sending out these letters and he's frightening people. He's creating an atmosphere of horror.
For sure. And now on September 30th, a few days after the letter is sent, 1888 again, this is the double murder day, isn't it?
Yeah, the double event. I have some problems with the double event, but I'll go into that later on.
Okay, we'll get it out there and then we'll analyse in due course. So the first victim on this night is Elizabeth Stride. Now, she only had her throat cut, which, well, I say only, compared to the last murder at least, which this led police to believe that Jack had been interrupted by the bloke that found her, who was Louis Demischutz, before he could, act on any incisions or cutting anything up. Then only 45 minutes later, after this body is found, Catherine Eddowes was found, within 5 minutes walking distance, and she was severely mutilated with her uterus and left kidney removed.
As well as that, she was facially mutilated, which suggests that maybe the murderer knew who she was.
Okay.
She's quite sad. The other ones, normally with murderers, if it's someone they know, maybe someone they hate, they will attack at their face. They will smash their face into things. They'll do something like that. Her face has got these distinct V marks. And some people, there's certain theories that suggest that these are Masonic markings that have been carved into her face. What I think happened is that actually the Ripper tried to cut her face off.
Wow.
Because it mentions that there are cuts in her eyelids. The tip of her nose is gone. And there are cut marks for her cheek. But if you were to cut downwards from above the eyebrow, that goes through the eyelid, that cuts the tip of the nose, and that goes through the cheeks. And it would leave a V serration. It was never looked at on the time as being the Ripper's trying to cut her face off. I think he was literally trying to, because there's this thing with the Ripper, he's taking trophies. He's a trophy killer. So he's taken a kidney, he's taken a womb. I think with this one, he tries to literally take her identity. He tries to take her face. But maybe he can't quite get it, which then to me suggests that maybe he wasn't a doctor. He didn't have the anatomical knowledge to get the face off. But he almost gets it, but then doesn't. But his violence is escalating. He's attacking people's faces now, whereas before he hadn't really done that.
Okay.
You can see his violence is escalating here.
For sure. Well, yeah, we'll come back to that one because there's a lot to discuss with that double murder, of course. Going next up in the timeline, on the 1st of October, we have the Saucy Jack postcards that have been sent.
Yes.
So these were received. This was to the police, wasn't it? The Saucy Jack postcards.
I think so. Saucy Jack was either to the police or because it was the From Hell letter.
That was to the vigilante group.
Yeah. That was a Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. But this one, I think, went to the police. Yeah.
So it received on the 1st of October, and it mentioned the two victims that were killed on the 30th. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes both killed early morning of 30th September. Part of Eddowes' ear was found detached at the crime scene as a result of facial mutilations that we've mentioned. Some authors have argued that this letter was sent before the murders were done. Before the murders were publicised, rather, which makes it very unlikely that they could have been...
It was just a journalist.
A hoax or anything like that. Because the knowledge of the crime, of course, was still within a select group of people.
Yeah, this wasn't like now when there's some sort of incident, people just tweet it. Exactly. This is such a different time.
Of course, yeah. And so the postcard read, I was not codding, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear all about Saucy Jack's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number one squealed a bit, couldn't finish straight off. Had not time to get ears off for police. Thanks for keeping last letter back till I got to work again, Jack the Ripper. So if we look at it in terms of that was meant to come before, it could well be from Jack, of course. But I don't know if you know that police officials. We'll get into that. Actually, I'll hold that information back. I'll hold that back. So then nothing happened until the 13th of October, in which this week the police spent the entire week searching every house in the East End slums, but they didn't find anything. And on the 16th of October, as we've mentioned a little bit, George Lusk, who was head of the Mile End Vigilance Committee, they basically were, helping out the police whenever they could, kind of thing, made up of shopkeepers, butchers, things like that. They received a letter which was addressed from hell. And if you research the From Hell letter, you'll get information about it.
I think that's probably the most infamous.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Because of the way it's signed off. And I think it was also sent with a kidney.
Well, yeah, it was sent in a box which contained half a human kidney, which at the time was believed to be Catherine Eddowes. It has since been confirmed to be a prank by medical students.
Which is... Yeah, I think that maybe sets a precedent for the letters going forward. But we'll
definitely
get into that in a bit.
Yeah, and I think it sets a precedent for the amount of... Well, the reason that everyone loves this case so much, because there was so much... it
was a media frenzy. I think that's what...
Yeah, of course.
It made it last in the public's imagination. This is why a good 2 years down the line, when another killing but to a woman happens, people go, oh, Jack the Ripper, he's back.
Right, yeah.
But that's the only link is it's a woman. Beyond that, it's almost completely extraneous. But it's this media frenzy, and we'll get into that later on because it's kind of fascinating. It's sort of the first serial killer case that has that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the final of the canonical 5, Mary Kelly, on the 9th of November. Now, she was not only disemboweled, but, quote, virtually skinned down. Fuck me, if you look at the images of it, because this is one of the only ones that there's an actual photo of. Definitely don't research it on Google. Don't research Mary Kelly if you are of a nervous disposition.
Because the first image results that come up are horrendous. I can't even look at the photo. It turns my stomach.
It's very graphic, and I think that this was the real escalation.
I think this is the Ripper's final killing. I think there are other killings that are erroneously linked to Jack later on. Okay. I think this is the last one. Okay. But you'll notice that the way he does this is quite different. The person he kills is a bit different. But I think this is everything Jack the Ripper learns is heightened in this kill. Because with the other killings he kills on the street, this one he kills her in her bed.
Yes.
He goes to her house and kills her.
Yep.
He completely destroys her. Like, it's almost not worth going through the level of injuries she receives because it's heinous. He takes a trophy, but this time he takes a heart. And her heart was never found. It wasn't sent in or anything like that. The heart is never found. But she was also a younger character. She wasn't with the other victims. They're all in their sort of mid to late 40s. They're 45, 48, you know. But she's 25. She's considerably younger. And she was described as being young and beautiful. She wasn't this washout, sort of destitute, lowest of the low as the other killings are. It's such an escalation. You could almost call it, it's like he's killed the prom queen here. He's kind of hit the jackpot with this one because she isn't this sort of scatty woman on the street. It's kind of like he's killed a supermodel. It's like it's almost like that. It's like he's killed someone a bit more remarkable, but it's horrendous what he does. He kills her, but after that killing, there is actually quite a substantial gap between that killing and the last one. There's a good month or so, which might be because of the heightened police presence.
Well, yeah, that's what because any time I've sort of casually heard about Jack the Ripper and known a bit about it, I always thought that it was like a couple of week frenzy, but it's over the space, we've got from the 31st of August to 9th of November. It's an extended period of time, of course. I think we should go into some theories and relate back to, I mean, do you want to analyse any of the killings in particular?
Right. So like I said at the start of this timeline, I think that Jack the Ripper killed 5 women, but I don't think one of the canonical 5 was one of those women.
Okay.
And I don't
think agree with you on this one.
You agree?
I might agree. It depends on who you're about to say, but carry on.
I don't think Liz Stride was killed by Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, I agree.
The reason I think this is that the notion that Jack the Ripper would kill 2 women in one night seems ridiculous to me.
Why?
But just because the level of police attention, and also the fact that we know what route Jack the Ripper took that night. Because Jack the Ripper actually leaves a bit of evidence that was genuinely from him that night, which is when he killed Catherine Eddowes in Maya Square, he goes back the direction of Liz Stride, and he drops a bit of her apron in front of a piece of anti-Semitic graffiti that says, the Jews are the men who won't be blamed for nothing. Which kind of also creates a bit of the world for us. We know that there was a lot of anti-Semitism, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But the idea that he would avoid detection from killing one and then loop back around towards killing one after completing a kill, like doing his thing, seems ridiculous to me. But it's plausible that he would do that if he didn't know about killing one. There's another reason I don't think he killed Liz Stride, is that someone saw her being attacked. There is one of the witness reports. There was a Jewish guy that saw her being attacked by 2 men. He later identified the woman he saw being attacked as being Liz Stride. She's attacked by 2 men, and one of them scares him off. Yeah. One of them calls him Lipsky, and Lipsky was a Jewish man who had been executed the year before. So it became a bit of a derogatory term in the area. If you were called Lipsky, it was like, you're a Jew. Fuck off, essentially. So he got scared off, left it. But he saw an attack done by 2 people. And that doesn't seem to fit with this idea that Jack the Ripper's a lone wolf going about killing.
Right.
Which I think he was. The idea that there are 2 people picking off people doesn't make sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
The killing's very dissimilar. It seems that she was actually killed by the slash of the throat, which isn't how Jack the Ripper killed. He killed by strangulation and then mutilated after. Because the reason we know this is because at the crime scenes, there's not actually a lot of blood, despite the level of violence. But if you're cutting someone's throat, that's arteries, that's arterial spray. Yeah. That's gonna get everywhere. You've seen enough movies, you know what happens when someone gets their throat cut. It's like a shower. But if you've killed someone, there's no blood pressure. There's no blood build up. So you can do that and it'll just sort of trickle out.
Yeah, exactly.
So we know that the Ripper killed by strangulation, cut the throat, did the mutilation. Jack the Ripper's attacks were probably quite quick. This notion that he took a long time to kill is a bit nonsensical. It's just assumed by the amount of injuries he causes. But his actual killings were fast. I don't think he killed Liz Stride. I think that she was killed in like some sort of gang incident. She was just targeted. She was seen. Someone went after her. But meanwhile, the Ripper was elsewhere doing the killing.
Yeah.
And then as he tries to double back, he almost crosses into the wrong territory.
Yeah. No, I'd agree. Because, I mean, if you think about it, if it's sort of prime time for a copycat killer or killers to target, and then immediately you wouldn't get the blame. It would be Jack the Ripper, of course.
The blame goes to Jack the Ripper, and then he gets double the glory, essentially.
Exactly. And the fact that the police were alerted to the killing, and then 45 minutes later, Eddowes is killed. Jack the Ripper would have had to have gone through police approaching the scene of Liz Stride to then get to Eddowes and kill her. And, you know, that offers up the notion that it could have been a woman, but because the police wouldn't
kill the Ripper theory. That's interesting.
But I completely agree. I think that the likelihood of and as you say, 2 people killing it, there's a lot that doesn't add up, and it does look like a copycat or someone taking advantage of the situation.
The thing is, as well, we know that there was violence towards women caused by gangs, because there was another woman who was erroneously, I think, linked to the Ripper killings. Who was killed a little bit before. Was killed earlier in August or in late July. Her name was Emma Smith,
Right.
and she had some savage injuries, but she claimed outright, I got attacked by a gang before she was killed. She was like, I got attacked by a gang of men. Maybe they're the same gang. We know that there was gangs of men committing violence on women at the time.
Yeah.
So it's not impossible to assume that maybe that was more of a gang attack than it was the Ripper. But I said at the start of this, I think 5 women were killed by Jack the Ripper. The other woman I think was killed is the first in the timeline and was killed before Ann Nichols, and was a woman called Martha Tabram. Now, Martha Tabram is killed in a slightly different way, and this is why people go, she's not connected. But if you look at it, she's the first in the timeline. And if we look at all of the 5 who were killed by the Ripper, his methods change. He develops a killing method, but the way he inflicts injuries varies. It changes. I think with Martha Tabram, what he does, because I should mention, she was stabbed 39 times.
Wow. Fuck me.
Which is quite different. The Ripper slashes and he cuts through people rather than stabs them.
Well, that's anger, whereas Jack the Ripper was sort of a precision killer and sort of calculated. That seems like a fit of anger almost, doesn't it?
Yeah. But I think it could also be looked at as serial killers' methods do change. They find, like anyone trying to do something, they find the way that works. And I think with Martha Tabram, he's killed her in a certain way, and maybe it's not been the satisfaction that the Ripper wanted. And you're right, that didn't work. Things in it worked. The overkill worked, but it was too much, and it was a bit of a pain in the ass. And I think because of that, he then changes his methodology. And that's why in the later killings, he goes for the throat. Whereas in this one, he just stabs the shit out of her, essentially. He goes absolutely ham on it.
Mm.
I think Martha Tabram was the Ripper's first kill. And then in that time between the start of August and the end, maybe he does a bit of reading, looks into some anatomy, and goes, if I were to strangle them, kill them via that, and then cut them up, I would maybe get a bit more gratification. I think that's how the Ripper operates, is he does this very savage kill, gets a taste for murder, and then becomes a bit more systematic in the way that he hunts people.
Mm.
That's what I think. I think that Martha Tabram is the real first victim of Jack the Ripper.
Okay, that's interesting. Now we've got the timeline out of the way, we should delineate. We should go through a bit of a profile of Jack and look at potential, suspects as to who Jack the Ripper was, and then give our theories as to who we think he was. Yeah. So, from the witness reports, the police made a vague profile of who Jack the Ripper was. They dictated that he was between 25 and 35 years old, roughly 5'5" to 5'7" in height, stocky, with a fair complexion and a moustache, and often wore a dark overcoat and a dark hat. So he would have blended in, really. That there's nothing to really make him stand out. You've mentioned this to me when we've talked off air. He had to have been someone to have known the area, to have known how to evade police, get around the place quickly, all the alleys and sides, all of that kind of thing. And as you say, women of the night, he might have known his victims. It could have been premeditated. Scotland Yard, when they spoke on the case, they said that he would have appeared to be, and I love this quote, perfectly sane, frighteningly normal, and yet capable of extraordinary cruelty. Sir Melville McNaughton, who was head of the CID at the time, he said that he knew that the suspect must have had an understanding of anatomy, and as we've said before, possibly a doctor. And McNaughton is said to have narrowed the search down to 3 names. Yes. So the first one is Montague Johnson Druitt. Now, Druitt may have had family members who were doctors. It was his uncle and cousin. And he's believed to have been around the age of 40 when he died and had a keen interest in surgery. He's believed to have lived with his cousin while the cousin was studying medicine close to the Whitechapel area. A month before the first canonical murder, if we're going by the widely accepted chain of events, Montague's mother had allegedly begun to go insane and Montague wrote in his diary that he himself feared that he was also going insane.
Mm.
McNaughton wrote that, quote, "From private information, I have little doubt that his own family suspected this man of being the Whitechapel murderer. It was alleged that he was also sexually insane."
Yes.
After Mary Kelly's murder, the fifth canonical, Montague had gone missing, only to be found dead within a month after Mary Kelly, and he was found floating in the Thames River.
Yeah, that's what I remembered about him. There's one of those things that I find. He's a good suspect because he immediately has that. Well, why did the killing stop?
Right,
He
exactly.
kills himself. So immediately, and that seems to match roughly with the way the events happened. He's found after the last kill, and it would explain why there isn't any other definitive Ripper kill after that.
Absolutely.
The idea that he's sexually insane, I wonder what that means. Because you have to bear in mind it is the 1880s. So, like, what would constitute sexual insanity? Like, would True Geordie be called sexually insane if
I
it
don't
were
know.
like back in the day? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
You're right.
that could mean he had a couple of kinks, or it could mean he wants to fuck dead people. Like, what?
Yeah, it's a very open-ended statement. I would imagine that because obviously insanity back in the day is very different to insanity now.
It was thrown around a lot back in.
Yeah,
So it's like so many creepy Victorian asylums.
Yeah, of course. So I think that I would go towards more hinting at obsession and that kind of thing, maybe, and maybe a bit of violence with it as well. But I'm not really sure how that would be defined personally. You're right.
There's some definite pluses to him as a suspect because he has the anatomical knowledge, which at least some people in the case at the time thought was crucial. He seems to have that. He's got this idea of him being this crazy person, this idea of his insanity fits, and the fact that he conclusively dies with the Ripper's killings. He ends at the same time. He's a good suspect
for sure. Yeah, that's the thing with these. It's that if Jack the Ripper had such a bloodlust and he clearly enjoyed the game, the game of killing them, taunting the police, why would he stop? And why would he stop without announcing that he had stopped? Yeah. So, that's why, you could lean towards this man, Montague Johnson Druitt. The second man, there was a little bit less information about him, Michael Ostrog.
Yes.
He was a Russian doctor and a criminal who had previously been in an asylum for homicidal tendencies. Homicidal tendencies. I mean,
what that means? That was me. I've got homicidal tendencies.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like an OCD. I think the main reason that he was fingered as a suspect was that he couldn't provide a strong alibi for where he was during any of the murders. So, but I didn't really find a lot of information on him. I don't know if that's a name that you're familiar with.
Yeah, he's one of the more sort of vague suspects, I think, because I think there's over 200, I think, suspects who have their names thrown into the hat at various points. Some of them are ridiculous.
Yeah,
but some of them make a bit more sense. Like they really vary quite substantially. But with the ones you've selected here, I've noticed there's an immediate theme of doctor's anatomy. You've sort of isolated that thread.
Well, these are the ones that the McNaughton found because I think he was convinced that there had to be an element of surgical knowledge and an anatomical knowledge.
Because if I remember rightly, McNaughton was not directly involved with the investigation at the time. I think he
was just head of the criminal investigation department at Scotland Yard.
He wasn't directly involved. He sort of oversaw stuff after he sort of went over the files, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the third that was on his list, and this is one that I think I would have to lean towards personally, is Aaron Kosminski.
Yeah.
He was a Polish Jewish resident of Whitechapel who had spent some time in an asylum in 1889 up until his death in 1919. he was known. So there you go. So he was in an asylum the year after Jack's murders, and the last murder was 9th of November. So a bit of
Isn't long after.
Yeah. He was known for his hatred towards women, prostitutes in particular. His appearance matched that of the man in Meter Square, which was Liz Stride in a double murder night. And he is... Yeah, right, exactly. And this is one of my favourite bits of information, bits of research to do with this. He is the main subject of the book called Naming Jack the Ripper. Naming Jack the Ripper was written by Russell Edwards in 2014. And Edwards spent 14 years researching the Ripper case, and he was basically convinced that Kosminski was the killer, based on the knowledge that a shawl that was purchased at an auction, and it was believed to have been found at the murder scene of Catherine Eddowes, contained DNA evidence, which proved it was, Kosminski who committed the killings. He said that he found DNA on the shawl and compared it to the descendants of Catherine Eddowes, and found semen on the shawl and compared it to Kosminski, and he said that it matched up. So Edwards' quote said, "I have got the only piece of forensic evidence in the whole history of the case. I've spent 14 years working on it, and we have definitely solved the mystery of who Jack the Ripper was. Only non-believers that want to perpetuate the myth will doubt. This is it now. We have unmasked him." So there you go, Adam. Podcast over. We've got it. Wait, no. Sorry, there's a little bit of a... Oh, hang on. However, what's this? However, the doctor who tested it totally fucked up.
Yep. He
basically...
It was a mutation thing, wasn't it? It was.
So here we go.
Do you want to go into this?
I do, because this is fucking brilliant.
This is one of my favourite bits of the whole case.
Just imagine having the confidence to write that in your book. Only non-believers will perpetuate the myth, from what I'm about to tell you. So the doctor tested Kosminski's DNA, and he found a cell mutation called 314.1C. That's what he says he claimed. Says he found, which is found in 1 in 290,000 people. So as he thought, bang to rights, this is the man, as you would.
Pretty narrow margin, considering the
exactly.
time. Yeah.
However, he incorrectly identified the cell mutation. Instead of being cell mutation 314.1C, it is actually 315.1C, which, Adam Brown, is found in 99% of people with European descent.
So we at least know that the killer was European.
So basically it went from, this is definitely him, to it could literally be anyone on an entire continent.
It's ridiculous. It's one of my favourite bits of the case, because it is so... This guy is so fucking confident. He's so, I've done it, boys. I've done it. I've caught the Ripper. I've handcuffed his skeleton. I've fucking done it. And then it's like, actually, I entered that wrong. Oh, so how much does that change the percentage? We know it's like 200,000. It's like, he's probably one of a billion people.
Basically, yeah. Imagine
he completely...
The difference is one number. It's a digit. It's a digit. And he was so... Let me just read you again. I've got the only piece of forensic evidence in the whole history of the case. We have definitely solved the mystery of who he was. We have now unmasked him. This is it. 99% of European descent.
To put it kindly, what a fucking mug. The guy made a complete arse of himself. It's just... he's an interesting suspect, but like... Fucking hell. Talk about putting your bets all on one horse, like, Christ.
That's the problem. He's an interesting suspect, and, up until the point where I say about all of that, he had been in an asylum from 1889 and died in an asylum. He hated prostitutes and women, and he was in the area at the time. So all of that, definitely does put him within the vicinity. But I think that a lot of people would write this one off based on the DNA fuck up.
Yeah. It's such a ridiculous fuck up that, you know, it could be him, but it's such a huge fucking mistake, because that DNA evidence could be complete nonsense. Like, it's linked potentially to Catherine Everett, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's linked to the murder.
Yeah, exactly.
It's because this is the problem with the Ripper case. I think it's why it's always going to gain that notoriety. You will never really solve it. You can have safe bets, and I think I've got quite a safe suspect. He's a bit of an outlier, but I think he's quite a good one. But you will never get it. And even when we've had these, like, there's been lots of fake confessions. There was a guy called James Maybrick, who supposedly was the Ripper, who lived in Liverpool, of all places.
Right.
Who was in this proposes that he was commuting to London, doing a bit of murder, and fucking off.
Yeah.
And it's just that he writes this fucking little diary going, "Oh, I'm Jack the Ripper," but it's blatantly bollocks.
Yeah.
And that, and I think a few of the other theories, perpetuate this idea of it's this sort of vampiric rich man stepping down into the muck of Whitechapel and cutting up prostitutes, which is just so ridiculous. And this idea that maybe the police were almost looking for the wrong man. They were looking for this rich gentleman or whatever, and it's just pointing them in the wrong direction. And I think one of the biggest things of a lot of these details is they point towards Polish or Jewish being the identifying factor. And I don't really understand how it's determined, because there's a lot of witness reports where someone goes, he was tall and dark, like he was this height and he was dark and a bit Jewish. And it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I mean, did he have like a little fucking hat on, and like was he, what was it, like a Hasidic Jew running about with a knife? Like is that what you mean by that? Like,
yeah. And I think that will always cloud over any potential suspects, because the anti-Semitism at the time, the police weren't exempt from that. You know, the police very much could have wanted it to be a Jewish man in Whitechapel so that they could, you know, put him away and have him sort of set an example almost. You know, as you know, it's a pessimistic way of looking at it, but I think that will always, it will always have a cloud over whoever you look at.
Because I mean, the thing is, we know this happened. We know that there were people who were unfairly judged. One of them, because you know there was that letter that says, "Oh, Leather Apron gave me real fits," or whatever it was. Leather Apron was a nickname given to Jack the Ripper in the papers before the Jack the Ripper letter. But there was a man in Whitechapel who was nicknamed Leather Apron. His name was John Pizer, and he was Jewish. And the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee came after him.
Wow.
Because the paper basically said, it's him. So
right,
they fucking went after him. But he didn't do it. He had an alibi. He was with his family that night. He wasn't the Ripper.
Yeah.
He definitively wasn't. But the paper said, "Oh, this guy had a fucking Leather Apron on. He wasn't a murderer." And then people went after him. People just filled the gaps and they went after it. And by convenience, he happened to be Jewish.
Yeah.
Which seems to fit what people wanted to see. Oh, brilliant. He's Jewish. He's not British. Good. We can go after him. He's a Jewish immigrant. We can go after that guy. I think that because of the casual anti-Semitism and racism at the time, it almost diminishes the credibility of so many of these witness reports, which go, "Oh, well, he looked a bit Jewish," or "He looked distinctly Polish," or whatever. And it's like, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah.
It's like it's so vague. He was definitely a person, they might as well have said. Like, oh, that's great. That tells us a lot. It's such a ridiculous sort of statement. But it speaks to the rife anti-Semitism and sort of general shittiness of the time period. It really, again, that's one of the things I like about this case, is that it really creates the world for us. Yeah. You know, that one of the key bits of Ripper evidence, physical evidence we have, is next to a big lump of anti-Jewish graffiti. Like, it's right there. That's as hard and fast a thing as you can set out. And the police actually destroyed the writing on the wall. Because if it got out, people would have gone fucking mental. And the Jewish people in the city would have been unsafe.
For sure. Yeah.
I mean, it would have been absolutely ridiculous.
The thing is that it doesn't link into the MO of Jack the Ripper to have left graffiti, and it almost
He just takes some time to whip his paint pot out.
yeah. Well, it entertains the notion that he intentionally left a clue, which he never did. You know, he was very meticulous in that.
It wouldn't surprise me if he did that to send off suspicion in the wrong way. That
Okay.
if I leave this here, maybe they'll go after him. But I genuinely don't think that the Ripper was almost as. And I think because we, as spectators to this event, we have such an overview of every detail. We know what the police were thinking. You know what Frederick Adeline, the investigator, was the line of questioning he was going down. We know what the papers were doing at the time. We know that there was this hatred of Jewish people. We have this overview of the whole case. And I think it's a misconception to think that maybe Jack the Ripper had that as well. He wouldn't know what the police were looking for. He wouldn't have done that. He wouldn't have known if the police were going after someone like him or someone like the Ripper or some posh tart in some palace somewhere. Like, he doesn't know what they're looking for. And this notion that he was sort of leaving intentional little breadcrumbs to mislead people, I genuinely think it was almost like he was in a trance. That he was just doing these killings and getting it done and then disappearing.
Wow.
His interest was getting the kill, getting a trophy, and fucking off. He was a trophy killer. He's like a lot of serial killers. He maybe wants a little bit of notoriety, but I think at this period he was getting that enough just from doing the killings. Because everyone else just did the rest for him, which is also part of the reason why I don't think he wrote any of the letters.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things that I wanted to go back on, actually. So I read us the letters, the Dear Boss and the postcards. In 1931, there was a journalist that came out and said, well, he claims that he and his colleague at the newspaper at the time had actually written all the letters signed Jack the Ripper. So that, they came out and said that they hoaxed them in order to keep the business alive.
Yeah. Sell more papers.
Exactly, yeah. And in 2018, a forensic linguist analysis found strong evidence suggesting that the postcards, Saucy Jack postcards I'm referring to, and the Dear Boss letter were written by the same person. So, it's a shame because, you like the idea and it sort of fits in that Jack the Ripper is this killer that he kills his victims and then he goes and, boasts about it almost. He enjoys the game of it, as I mentioned earlier. But
it adds to that theatricality of the case.
It does. But that is almost the point in what we're saying, because we mentioned there that he wanted to, the police wanted to perpetuate this idea that it was a Jewish person. And I think the media wanted to perpetuate this idea and this narrative when realistically, all that's happened is a bloke that, a vicious bloke has gone out and killed 5 women. And, by the looks
it was
of
used as an opportunity to
create
people's wallets.
Yeah, maybe, we have that retrospective look where we look back and it's almost like it's a story almost. It's like a Sherlock Holmes novel in that you've got this killer that keeps eluding the police but taunting them. But that at the time, they could have been creating that, really.
But that might have been why, because, Sherlock Holmes was written at the time. It would have had that similarity.
Of course.
People who were reading those papers and whatever, they would have been familiar with those sort of books and things, and that would have sold. Oh, wow, it's like I'm in a Sherlock Holmes story. Look, the Ripper struck again, and he sent a letter. He's teased them,
Absolutely.
That builds this sense of narrative to what I think you almost... This idea, I think, of the Ripper being this through line, this narrative, is kind of complicated to perpetuate.
Right.
And I think it is one of the saddest things. It's been turned into this little, trivial story, but we forget that what really happened is a bunch of innocent women got murdered.
Yeah.
And I think it gets forgotten as you go through cases, and people, at its core, vulnerable, frightened people suffer the most atrocious and egregious crimes that you could commit on an individual for no reason. They didn't do anything to warrant that. They were just struck off, and it's the most unfair and heinous thing. And it got turned into this frenzy by journalists and by gawkers and everyone looking into it. I mean, that's almost what we're doing a little bit in a way.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Not in a cynical way, but it's ultimately the case is that deep down at its core, in this case, innocent people died. And that gets forgotten because of this enigma of who killed them.
Yeah.
Has hung over policing and, you know, amateur detectives and everyone who's read about it ever since.
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper's shadow still looms large, well over a century past his death. And I think that's sort of what makes this case so fascinating. And the papers knew this. They knew this man was so enigmatic that they could create anything about him, and it would be almost definitely more interesting than whoever he was.
Yeah.
And that's why I tend to throw out a lot of the more ridiculous suspects. We mentioned in a conspiracy special we did about a year back now, we did one about the royal conspiracy, the notion that Jack the Ripper's his identity was actually that he was the Queen's like grandson or something like that, and that the royal surgeon was going about murdering people, or that it was Masonic or something like that. It's almost definitely nonsense. Like, it's the most absurd thing, the notion that, oh, they were going after prostitutes because they had all witnessed a royal wedding, was the notion of it. And it's like, oh, don't be so daft. It's not fucking true. Yeah. Like, it was, I think the most damaging thing to the Ripper case is this notion that there was this, like, this remarkable character killing them. You look at the people who have been, you've mentioned, McNaughton's top three. They are these extreme, they're insane, and they're murderers, and they've got murderous intent, and they're foreign, and they're Jewish, and they're whatever they are. They fit the notion of what a serial killer was back then so perfectly. It's exactly what the police are looking for, and they found what they were looking for. Because that's it's like, if you want to find symptoms to something, you will find it. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to find evidence, you'll pinpoint something, go, oh, well, that could be this, and your brain you can make the leap. And I kind of think that's what the police did, because they were just so stumped.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I find
it's sort of similar to when we discuss conspiracy theories, and you know, we reference it ourselves, is that you can slip into the sort of thing of picking and choosing the science, picking and choosing the facts, and look into what fits into the narrative, as we keep saying, rather than the black and white of, you know, if you take a step back from some things, okay, actually that doesn't really fit into it. You know, you just sort of crowbarring in to fit into an idea for that closure, as you say, of course. One of we haven't mentioned him yet, but one of the suspects is Walter Sickert.
Sickert's quite interesting. I looked him up a little bit earlier.
Yeah, this is the thing. He's interesting because from the little that I know about him, the idea is that he was an artist who recreated the murders of Jack the Ripper, and drew these gruesome scenes. And I think that one of the theories that created this idea that he should be a suspect, or that he was Jack the Ripper, was that he was identifying little details that weren't public information. And they're kind of things that you would have to be privy to the scene of the crime to know. And I think that I don't know a lot about him as a suspect, but that you have to think, oh yeah, wouldn't that be brilliant? That would be, he would be brilliant.
The idea that he was literally documenting his own murders.
Yeah, of course.
And in a visual medium. There was actually a painting he did called Jack the Ripper's Bedroom.
Wow.
Like, it even went to that point. Like, I don't think he was the Ripper.
Okay.
But I think he was a fanboy.
Yeah.
I think, like a lot of people now, these Ripperologists, these people who go through Whitechapel and do tours, I think he was sort of the original super fan of the Ripper. He found him fascinating.
Yeah.
But almost to quite a sort of sickly extent. There was mention of him being at a party and he dressed up as Jack the Ripper, this kind of thing.
Wow.
Like, he really got into this, and you could read it as he's sort of taunting us. he's Jack the Ripper, and he's going, "Oh look, I'm dressed as Jack the Ripper. Isn't that funny? Look at my quirky hat."
Right.
This hat's actually got blood in it from Catherine Eddowes. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it could be that, but it probably isn't. I do genuinely think that he was just a super fan. But it is fascinating, this idea that he was this, like, I guess, tortured artist, if you want.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of Hollywood thrown in, but
For sure.
it's kind of intriguing.
That's the thing, but that is it. It is intriguing, and we sort of, we kind of want it to be the case of.
You want it to have a narrative. You want it to have structure.
Yeah,
You want it to go, this guy was this, and then he did this, and then
exactly.
You want it to fit a nice little plot line, like it's a detective book.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. So, are there any suspects that I've missed out? Is there anyone that you want to mention?
One of the ones I wanted to mention, because I know you know about him. One of the things that I find so fascinating about his case is that there's a very good chance that another infamous serial killer was in London at the time.
Yeah.
And I think you know who I'm talking about.
I do, yeah.
I'll let you take the reins on this one, because after this, I want to talk about my suspect.
So you're referring to the man who is commonly known as, the original serial killer, American man H.H. Holmes, who, my God, this man. So he had, it became known as Murder House, I think.
Yeah.
And, popular media such as American Horror Story, I think they've drawn off of him. Murder Castle, that was it, Murder Castle, where it was essentially a hotel that he owned, and all of the rooms and bathrooms and things like that had booby traps in to trap people and kill people, and people would go in there and disappear because the beds would flip up and throw you down a chute, and
Wallace and Gromit, that.
Yeah, really morbid, like Wallace and Gromit, directed by James Wan or something like that.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and gruesome things like they'd fall onto a bed of spikes, they'd be trapped in little ways until they died and suffocated, and he confessed to, I think, 27 murders. But I think that people have speculated that there's a lot more that he killed, and there is this idea that he was in London at the time of the Jack the Ripper killings,
and he has been sort of suggested as a suspect. I think he's just an interesting bit of trivia in this case,
for sure.
He fits the description. He's around the right height. He's got the moustache. He's got the look. He definitely fits. But to be fair, to be fair, everyone in Victorian times was a man around 5'7" with a moustache. So going, Jack the Ripper looks like everyone on the street. It's like, brilliant, helpful, great. Right. I think that's why they looked for distinctive characters, because it's a hope that it would at least be someone who was fucking recognisable. But then they just get these everyman descriptions. But he fits the physical criteria, but his method of killing is very different. As you say, he's this technical guru who, kills them with poison, kills them with traps, and then wasn't it that he sort of burnt away their soft tissue and then sold their skeletons to the hospital? Wasn't that a thing that he did?
I don't know about that part myself, but I think that
in his own right,
I think that the fact that there's a lot of speculation of how many, because I think a lot of people think that he killed up to 200 people, it's like, where are the bodies? Is that kind of thing. So I mean, there could be something to what you're saying, but I'm not entirely sure on the exact details. But
I think, if I remember rightly, and I might be totally wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was killing people, getting rid of everything, having the skeletons, selling them on to doctors and stuff, and being like, here's a skeleton, and getting basically paid to kill. And that was the idea, is that he was actually a serial killer as a business model.
Wow.
Which is kind of remarkable.
Yeah.
If you want to put it that way. But I don't think he was a ripper. But I think it's so fascinating to think that two of history's most famous serial killers could have, in theory, been in the same pub at the same time.
Yeah.
They could have crossed each other on the street. with no awareness of what either one was going to do.
Absolutely.
I find that is so morbid and horrible, but also kind of fascinating that could have happened. These two remarkable and horrendous people could have crossed paths.
Of course, yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
It is incredible. But then again, I think that it goes into that sort of, the narrative and how lovely, well, not lovely, but how incredible that would be looking back. But we must remember how truly big London is. And,
even then, it's a long time ago, but it's still a big place.
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, I think that he is a very interesting one to look at. You're right. And yeah, that is the thing with the Jack the Ripper case, as we mentioned. We all sort of want to build this incredible narrative around it.
Yeah. I'm really glad in that last bit that you mentioned this idea of the first serial killer. Like, because this is the thing that you have to bear in mind that if you've seen Mindhunter on Netflix, you'll know that the term of a serial killer, that notion, kind of wasn't a thing yet in the way that it's recognized now of what a broad sort of outline of what a serial killer does and how they operate. There wasn't that precedent back then, which is why I think the police were so like about the case. They were so clueless. They were doing their best, but they had no way of dealing with it. They didn't have forensics, and they also didn't have the behavioural knowledge beyond he was insane. They didn't have a particularly sort of nuanced approach to serial killer psychology. But if we were to look at the case now with that idea that serial killers tend to be like a male serial killer who fits this sort of MO would be someone, as they did say at the time, sort of distressingly normal. Someone between sort of in their 30s and 40s, probably comes from a sort of quite damaged background. It wouldn't have been this sort of, he was from a happy family, like he would have been from a broken family. This idea that he's come from a period, a world of difficulty. But we also look at, he has local knowledge. He's done all these things. He's got, maybe he's got quite a bad relationship with women in his life, maybe a strained relationship with the women in his life. With this individual I'm going to mention, we have him banged to rights at a murder scene by name.
Wow.
Which we don't have of any of these others. We have this guy. But the horrible thing is that the police never looked at him as a suspect. They looked at him as a witness. And we see him at the first murder. Because I mentioned briefly that there was a cart rider, like a sort of cart packer, who's at the scene and sees Mary Nichols' body.
Yeah.
His name is Charles Cross, and he is the man I think was Jack the Ripper. Well, I say his name was Charles Cross. That's the name he gave. But his real name was Charles Lechmere.
Wow.
So immediately he's done something a bit fucking iffy, and he's presented a false name.
How do we know that his name is different to the one he gave?
So here's the thing. If you go through all the documentations, things like census, things like that back in the day, we have him in the papers. He's interviewed as Charles Cross. The papers were writing about it at the time. One of them goes, "Oh, the man was at the scene, and then he met Charles Cross, who was there as well." And Charles Cross was actually interviewed. But if you go through the census, there isn't a man called Charles Cross who lives at this address that he gives. I live at so-and-so address, and my name's Charles Cross. He basically says that in the paper. That man doesn't live there, but a man called Charles Lechmere does. So immediately he's presented a false name. But Charles Cross was, I think, his like maiden name, like his mum's maiden name, something like that.
Okay.
Because Charles Cross, he lives in the area. He lives in Whitechapel, and he lived in Whitechapel all his life, and he moved a lot around Whitechapel. We have all of his documentation as to where he lived and things like that. He moved around a lot. He came from a broken home. He had a lot of his mother lived with lots of different men at various different points, which is why he had this sort of selection of last names.
Right.
But he's at this first scene, and he says, "Oh, I was there at so and so time." And then the next guy, because basically at that first scene there are two men who are there. There's Charles Cross and there's another man whose name escapes me at the moment. But between when Charles Cross, who seems to be the first man on the scene, oh, he is the first man on the scene, between him being there and finding the body, and between the other man appearing, there's like a good 10 minutes or so discrepancy between when they say they both meet each other, which suggests to me that he was there longer than was reported.
Right.
I've immediately got him at the scene. He's got this background that sort of broadly fits a serial killer's idea. He's got a broken home. His mum was still alive as well, quite an older one. She was an older woman, and he basically cared for her. So then he's got the lapsed relationship with a woman in his life. He fits this idea of just being a normal guy. He's got the knowledge of the streets because of his job. His job was, and this is the thing that really fucking gets me about him, because the thing is with Jack the Ripper, he needed to be able to kill people without being, he would have been, even though the way he would have killed people, as I've said, the idea that he strangled them to death and then committed mutilation, however carefully he does that, he's still going to get covered in blood. He's going to get blood on him.
Of course, yeah.
This guy works, he's a meat packer.
Uh-huh.
He's delivering big fucking haunches of meat in the early mornings around about 3 a.m. time of the killing. So he was on his commute to work. So he's killing early morning. If he's covered in blood, it doesn't matter because he's a meat packer. He can hop off his little fucking meat cart, run up, do his killings, get that done, hop on, and go, oh, I'm just off to work.
Mm.
In theory, if he keeps the cart, which I don't know if he does, but he would have access to his cart at any given time, in theory. If he can get on the cart, he's got a way of getting away from the scene where he wouldn't be pulled. If he were to keep haunches of meat back, if he's been out killing in his apron, the leather apron, he would have worn an apron.
Okay.
He would have been covered in blood. And he would have been covered in blood in a way that wouldn't have been remarkable because you would expect him to be bloody. Because he's going to be carrying these big, chunks of pig and, haunches of beef. He's going to have them leaning on his stomach. So he's going to get covered in blood. It's going to be on his hands. It's going to be all over him. He could walk away from the slaughter of Mary Kelly onto that cart and no one would think the wiser. They would just go, oh, there was a particularly bloody steak on him.
Wow.
That would be their response. They would barely even acknowledge him.
Absolutely.
But every single murder site is within a couple of minutes from the route that he took to work. Now, I'm not saying that he was going about killing people on his commute. What I am saying is that he knew the routes. He knew those ways around because they were all off the main chute of this road. So he could sort of go down there and he would have known the roads. He grew up in the area. And if we suggest that he killed Liz Stride, even though I don't think he did, if he did, his childhood home was just up the road.
Oh, wow.
Where he grew up. The little area he grew up in, because her murder site is actually quite far away from the others. But where she was murdered is right in the area where he grew up.
Right.
So those streets he would have known since he was a child. So he has the local knowledge. He has the alibi. He's covered in blood. No one's going to care. He's commuting every day. So he's even got a ride out of there that's going to barely garner attention. He's got this car. He's got this strained relationship. He's come from this broken household and he's given a false name.
Yeah.
Which
that's
relates suspicion. They're going to look for Charles. Yeah. So if the police went, hang on, we need to find this Charles Cross dude. There isn't a Charles Cross. They wouldn't find him straight away. By the time they find his name, he could disappear.
Wow.
He is an incredible potential suspect who is, and as I say, was at the first crime scene.
Yeah.
He was right there. And no one, whereas if you were to do a modern investigation, if there was someone that's seen at the crime scene, they wouldn't just be treated as a witness. They would be treated as a suspect. But he never was. He was never looked at as a suspect. No police document goes, I always had a feeling it was this guy. There was nothing about him. And if we look at the idea that he was packing meat, he would have seen butchers at work. He would know the most effective way to cut through meat. He would be able to learn from observation. He has the anatomical knowledge, broadly speaking.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a leap, but it's nothing to say that he wouldn't have learned from that. I honestly think that if you were being the Ripper and making those incisions, you could probably do that with fairly broad knowledge, and that's knowledge that you could probably garner just from working with meat.
Mm.
And it means as well, he would have had access to big fucking scary looking knives.
Without any suspicion.
Without any suspicion. He has the flawless alibi.
Wow.
Like, the dude could disappear like Jack the Ripper needs to. And beyond all this, he ends up surviving up until the year that my great-granddad was born. He survives until, like, 1927, 1926.
Oh, wow.
So that means that the Ripper was still alive in the lifetime of people who are alive now.
So why, what would be his motivation to kill 5 women and then stop?
See, this is the problem. This is the issue with it. Because without ever having Jack the Ripper in custody, we don't know what would actually give him this motivation to kill. We know that he had this this broken home that may have developed his antisocial behavior. He's clearly not squeamish. He's working with, things getting hacked up and stuff. He's clearly not bothered by sort of the grotesque in that regard.
Yeah.
So he's already got maybe a bit of disposition. The problem is because he was never treated as a suspect, we don't really have an in-depth psychological profile. We've got these, he was sexually insane, or he had homicidal tendencies. We don't have that with him because he was never treated as a suspect. But I genuinely believe that if this investigation were to happen today, he would have been number one until he could be definitively ruled out.
Yeah.
I do genuinely think that there is, again, this is a problem because it was so long ago. You have to fill the blanks. And you do have to do an amount of blank filling with this guy because he was never treated as a suspect. There are gaps in our information about him. But I do think that everything adds up with him. The problem is you don't want to make too many leaps, but I do think he is someone who isn't often treated as a suspect, who has a lot of, I think, more than just coincidental details that seem to fit perfectly. If we were to create a broad profile of the Ripper, he fits it so well. But as you say, we don't know where this compulsion to kill came from. That's the problem. But we do know from that, first killing I mentioned, the Martha Tabram one, she was killed with quite a large knife. Butcher's knives aren't small.
Yeah.
You would have access to that. Maybe it just took one violent impulse to kill, and he went, I like that. And that was giving him the sexual gratification. I think he had some sort of issue with his wife at the time. I think there was some sort of broken home situation. He had daughters and things like this. Right. He was surrounded by women constantly. And I think if he had this inbuilt hatred, he would just find a nobody to cut up. It kind of fits. I genuinely think that, again, it's a big leap. I could be completely wrong. But he's there. He's at crime scenes. He's walking away drenched in blood, and everyone's going, whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's just remarkable that he slipped the net, because the problem is with him is he sets this quite alarming notion that this guy fits and he slipped through the net. No one ever looked for him. No one ever considered him to be the Ripper. And this guy, it really looks like it could be him.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know any of that. And yeah.
But it begs the question, who else slipped away? I mean, I went through a witness, but who's to say that the Ripper was never seen at any of the crimes? He was never treated as a witness, never treated as a suspect. He could be completely unknown to us. And that is what makes Jack the Ripper so fascinating. And Charles Lechmere is just an indication of that. If he wasn't the Ripper, he's just a suggestion. But there are hundreds of people just like him who fit that criteria. That meatpacking plant he worked at must have had hundreds of employees.
Yeah.
Sounds like 100 Jack the Rippers you've got in one building.
Yeah, of course.
But if we go, anatomical knowledge, anyone who works with cutting up fish, with cutting up meat, with being a butcher or a coroner, hell, some of the people who might have looked at these bodies afterwards, who went, he might have had anatomical knowledge, they could be talking about themselves.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Jack the Ripper could have been anybody. And that is what simultaneously makes him so scary and also what makes people so fascinated by him. He could be anyone, but he is no one.
I like that. I think that wraps it all up pretty perfectly. Yeah, that's a brilliant point. I think
I think
that
that's the way to close it.
yeah, that's a brilliant way of ending it. Really, I mean, I mean personally, I don't, you know,
Do
I
you
would
have
have
a
to.
suspect you think is the Ripper?
This is the thing. I really don't. That's the thing. I mean, I can, you know, if anyone's listened to the podcast enough knows that I've got a fucking opinion about anything, but this is one that has sort of stumped me in that there's so much information, but there's so little. And
It
there's so
almost
much
becomes
to talk about. There's so much to talk about with this, but it's so difficult to form an actual opinion and an educated guess on who it was. I mean, you know, initially I would think that Montague Johnson Druitt would probably be the most likely, but that's because that's just the bloke that fits into the narrative most. But I mean, talking about this Charles Cross fella, I mean, I'd have to sign with that really. I mean, based on
it's incredible.
and that sort
Ultimately,
of leads me sort of to the final point I think of this is do you think that we will ever know who Jack the Ripper was, and do you think we ever should find out whoever he is?
I don't think we'll ever find it out short of someone inventing a time machine. I genuinely don't think there is any way of determining it. There wasn't the forensics of the time. Like, we're talking about a police department that was so stumped that they even considered taking photographs of the eyes of the victims to see if that maybe kept some sort of image of Jack the Ripper in them. That's how desperate the police got. That's not even like bullshit.
Yeah.
That's legit. Like, that was something that was supposedly an option that the police looked at. I don't think we will ever find who he was. And I think that whilst we shouldn't, like you say, I don't think we need to necessarily find him because he did what he did. And I almost don't think he deserves to be named. I don't think he deserves that sort of post-mortem glory that he would receive. There he is, he's Jack the Ripper, that's the guy. And he was never caught, and 200 years later we found him. And what fucking difference has it made? I think the most important thing with Jack the Ripper is what he did shouldn't be forgotten, because Jack the Ripper was ultimately, beyond just being a horrific butcher and the most unspeakably cruel person you could imagine, he was a force for change. What he did, as I said before, totally terraformed the landscape of London and the world. He is the birth of the serial killer. He creates the Preston that every Yorkshire Ripper, Camden Ripper, the Jack the Stripper, all of these serial killers are just wannabes to him. But he's an unbeatable benchmark because policing's changed. You'll never reach that. I think Jack the Ripper's actions need to be remembered, but it almost needs to be treated now almost like the work of a bogeyman in a way, because you will never find him. You could go insane trying to find this guy because you will never ever determine it short of being there.
I think that's a perfect way to end it, really. I think we've covered most bases with this. It's been fascinating to talk about.
I mean, you could go in so many directions of this. This podcast could go on for like 6 hours.
It
There's
could,
so much to talk about, but
we'd get no nearer to the answer.
Wouldn't get any nearer than we are now. Yeah,
for sure.
That's exactly it.
And that is the purpose of these unsolved mystery episodes, Adam. Is
to explore what we can find, but
exactly,
unfortunately, accept that we will never get the answers.
Exactly. I really recommend anyone that has got to this point and enjoyed what we're talking about, definitely do go ahead and research more into this and let us know what you find in the comments. If we missed anything, if you have any theories of your own, do let us know, because we do read them and we do enjoy learning. I think especially from your end, Adam, your passion for this subject is really
I'm a big history buff, so I'm always drawn to stuff like this. I'd also add, if anyone has any unsolved mysteries that they want us to talk about, throw them in the comments. We will look into shit and take a deep dive and find out if bloody Atlantis was real and any silly sort of thing like that. We will dig into it
for sure.
Like, we'll see what we can find.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's been fun to talk about. Been great stuff. Yeah, thank you for that, Adam. And
Do my best.
Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed. Make sure, as always, if you are listening on YouTube or on Spotify, head over to the YouTube and hit subscribe and hit the bell notification to stay updated with our latest episodes. We'll be back soon with some more unsolved mysteries, conspiracy theories, and a lot more exciting stuff. Adam and I have got we've got a lot planned. It's exciting stuff. Yeah, that's it from us this week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Adam, again for coming this week and joining me in this chat.
Honour as always, mate.
Until next time, thank you again for listening. Take care, and we'll see you later.
Peace.